The thing nobody tells you about standing in a room with 37 alien species is how quiet it gets right before everything changes. Not silent, quiet, there's a difference. Silent is when there's nothing. Quiet is when everything that was making noise suddenly stops, and you feel the absence like a pressure change, like your ears are waiting, like the whole room is holding something in its chest and hasn't decided whether to breathe yet. That's what it felt like. I was standing at my post in the third tier of the Covenant Hall on Meridian Station, dressed in the ceremonial blues that the Human Diplomatic Corps had issued us exactly 11 days before the summit. The fabric was too stiff. My collar sat wrong. I'd been shifting my neck every 40 minutes since we arrived, and I still hadn't gotten it right. And then the Queen's daughter reached over and took my hand. And didn't let go. I'm going to tell you everything that led to that moment. Because the moment itself doesn't make sense without the 14 days before it. And the 14 days before it don't make sense without understanding what humans were doing on Meridian Station in the first place, and why most of the galaxy thought we had absolutely no business being there. Set up, Meridian Station and the world that built it. Let me tell you about Meridian Station. It sits at the gravitational midpoint between three star systems, Veth Prime, the Saloon Cluster, and what humans call the Reach, though the Reach doesn't have a formal name in galactic standard, because for a long time the Galactic Council didn't acknowledge it as a sovereign territory. It was just the place humans came from. A footnote, an asterisk in the star charts that older civilizations had made before humanity figured out how to leave its own solar system. The station itself is massive. I mean genuinely. Staggeringly massive in a way that doesn't hit you until you're standing inside it and you look up, and the ceiling is so far away that the light from the bioluminescent panels at the top looks like stars. It was built by the Vethali, the oldest spacefaring civilization currently active in this region of the galaxy, over the course of what they casually refer to as 3 construction cycles, which translates to roughly 900 human years. 900 years. To put that in perspective, 900 years ago, humans were fighting wars with swords. The Vethali built a space station that could house 400,000 inhabitants from 40-plus species, and sustain them indefinitely, in the same period of time that humans were figuring out gunpowder. I thought about that a lot during my first week on the station. It had a way of making you feel very small. Very new, very much like someone who'd shown up to a dinner party that started before their grandparents were born. But here's the thing about Meridian Station that the briefing documents didn't fully prepare me for. It was alive in a way that no human structure I'd ever been in was alive. Not literally, or, well, not entirely literally. The Vethali had integrated biological systems into the station's architecture in ways that human engineers were still trying to reverse engineer with special permission 3 decades after first contact. The walls in certain sections breathed. Not metaphorically, they actually expanded and contracted in a slow rhythm, maybe once every 6 minutes, tied to some atmospheric regulation system that kept CO2 and oxygen ratios optimal for species with wildly different respiratory needs. When you put your hand against one of those walls, you could feel it. A slow, deep pulse, like a heartbeat that was just slightly too slow to be comfortable. The corridors changed temperature by section. The lighting shifted spectrum depending on what biological preferences were registered in any given area. So you might walk around a corner and go from the warm amber that humans found comfortable into a deep violet blue that the Saloon preferred, and then another 50 meters and it'd shift again into the almost ultraviolet flicker that the Caravith used to navigate. It was, in a word, overwhelming. And we, the 12-person Human Diplomatic Corps team that I was part of, had been dropped into the middle of it, and told to represent humanity at the most significant diplomatic event in the last 60 years. The Meridian Accords Renewal Summit. I should explain what that is, because the briefings they give you before something like this are written by people who assume you already know most of it, and then they fill in the gaps with jargon. And by the end, you think you understand, but you actually have about 70% of the picture, and the missing 30% turns out to be the part that matters. The original Meridian Accords were signed approximately 60 years ago, before first contact with humanity, which happened 41 years ago. The Accords were essentially the foundational peace treaty of this region of the galaxy. Before them, the Veth Prime systems and the Saloon cluster had been in an on-again, off-again conflict for about 300 years over resource rights and territorial boundaries. The Caravith had been involved peripherally. The Drain, a species that humans have almost no diplomatic relationship with, which I'll get to, had been involved more than peripherally. The Accords ended that, formally, with signatures and witnesses and a ceremony that apparently took 11 days and involved 47 different cultural rituals that all had to be respected simultaneously, which sounds impossible until you meet the Vethali diplomatic team and understand that they have been doing literally nothing else for the last 3 millennia. Every 20 years, the Accords are renewed. All signatory species, and any new species that have joined the Galactic Council in the intervening period, attend the summit, reaffirm their commitments, and sign updated addendums. Humanity had attended 2 previous renewals. We were a minor signatory, more of an observer plus status, technically. We hadn't been involved in the original Accords, and we didn't have territorial stakes in the core disputes. What we had was the reach, our systems, our colonies, our expanding presence in a region of space that was increasingly adjacent to territories that did have stakes, which meant everyone had an interest in keeping us at the table, even if they weren't entirely sure they wanted us there. I knew all of this going in. What I didn't know, what the briefing documents definitely did not adequately prepare me for, was what it felt like to walk into the pre-summit reception and have 30 different species look at you the way you'd look at someone who'd shown up to a black tie event in hiking boots. Not hostile, not cruel. Just assessing. Like they were all running the same quiet calculation. How much does this one matter? How much do we need to adjust our approach? What is the minimum engagement required? I'd felt versions of that in my career before. Anyone who goes into diplomacy does. But there's a difference between feeling it from another human and feeling it from something that has 4 arms and photosensitive cilia where its face should be. The adjustment period is real. They don't warn you about that enough. My name is Sergeant First Class Delane O'Reys. I'm 34 years old. Before I was seconded to the Human Diplomatic Corps as a ceremonial security attaché, I spent 9 years in the Earth Combined Forces, mostly doing infrastructure security on off-world installations. I'm not a diplomat by training. I'm a soldier who got cross-trained in protocol because my code decided my psych evaluations showed unusual adaptability to cross-cultural stress environments, which is a very long way of saying I don't panic easily and I can read a room. I was assigned as the personal security attaché to Ambassador Lena Vasquez, humanity's lead representative at the summit. Ambassador Vasquez was, and is, one of the most composed human beings I have ever met. She'd been in the diplomatic corps for 22 years. She'd done 3 previous interspecies assignments. She spoke Vethali standard at near-native fluency and could hold a workable conversation in Saloon formal register. She also had a habit of pressing her left thumbnail into her index finger when she was nervous that I only noticed because I'd been trained to notice things like that. And I saw her do it approximately every 40 minutes for the first 3 days on the station. Even she found it overwhelming. The summit proper didn't start until the 5th day. The first 4 days were what the official schedule called pre-ceremonial diplomatic engagement periods, which meant structured social events designed to let delegations interact in lower-stakes environments before the formal proceedings began. Day 1 was the welcome reception. Day 2 was a cultural exchange program. Day 3 was the species history presentations. Day 4 was what was listed as a collaborative species banquet, essentially a multi-species dinner, which sounds simple until you realize that about a third of the attending species don't eat anything. 2 species are actively photosynthetic and just need to stand near a light source for a while. And the Caravith experienced dining as a deeply private spiritual act and found the concept of communal eating mildly horrifying. Humanity brought a chef. Her name was Corporal Aisha Mbeki. She was technically listed as a cultural liaison support specialist, and she made the best rice she'd ever made in her life in a kitchen that ran on Vethali energy systems she'd had to learn from scratch. People ate it. Even some of the alien dignitaries. The ones who ate tried small amounts of human food. One of the junior Vethali ambassadors had 3 helpings of jollof rice, and then stood very still for a long moment with what I'm fairly sure was the Vethali equivalent of profound personal reckoning. Small victories. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to tell you about the Queen's daughter. I want to tell you how we got there, me. A security attaché from San Juan with a stiff collar and a half-eaten protein bar in my left pocket, to the moment when a member of Veth Prime's royal family took my hand and refused to let go. The Queen's name, in a loose human phonetic transliteration, is Verath Nasolith. She is the reigning sovereign of Veth Prime, which is not quite a planet in the way humans use that word, but rather a collection of massive deep space structures in close orbit that function as a single interconnected civilization. The Vethali don't live on planetary surfaces by choice. They're not incapable of it, they just prefer constructed environments, which, given that they've been building things for 3,000 years, is understandable. Verath Nasolith had attended the previous 2 renewals personally. She was approximately 140 years old in Vethali Standard Time, which translates to something close to 220 human years, which in Vethali biology makes her middle-aged. She moved through the station with the specific kind of unhurried certainty that you see in people who have never been in a situation they weren't prepared for. Every delegation made time to acknowledge her. Even the Drain, who acknowledged almost no one, angled their body language toward her when she passed. She had brought her daughter. This was unusual, historical unusual, the kind of unusual that the senior diplomatic staff noted in hushed tones and then added to their briefing notes with asterisks. In the previous 2 renewals, no member of the Vethali royal family below the rank of senior ambassador had attended. The Queen's daughter was not a senior ambassador. She held a cultural title that translated roughly to something like heir to the ceremonial lineage, which was a significant designation within Vethali society, but didn't have a direct diplomatic parallel in human terms. Her name, again, rough human phonetics, was Lyeth Nasolith. She was, by Vethali reckoning, very young, about 40 years old, which in their biology was something like late adolescence, not quite a full adult in the ceremonial sense. Close, but not there yet. She was also, and I'm aware this sounds strange when describing a species that looks nothing like a human, clearly nervous. I noticed it on the first day. The first encounter. The welcome reception was held in what the station called the Convergence Hall, a circular space roughly the size of a soccer stadium with a transparent ceiling that looked out into open space. Meridian Station's orbit gave you a constantly shifting view through that ceiling. Stars, the distant blue-white of Veth Prime's star, occasionally the dark silhouette of passing ships in the approach lanes. It was genuinely beautiful. One of those things you think you're prepared for because you've seen pictures, and then you look up and realize pictures are nothing. Each delegation had been given a specific area of the hall, color-coded lighting zones, largely, since the station couldn't change its architecture for individual events, but could change its lighting. Our zone was a warm amber gold that I suspect was chosen to complement the blues of our dress uniforms, which meant someone in the station's event coordination team had done their homework on human visual preference and fashion sense, which was somehow both touching and unsettling. I was positioned at the edge of Ambassador Vasquez's immediate perimeter, close enough to respond quickly, far enough not to crowd her social engagement space. My job at these events was essentially to exist visibly without existing intrusively. Be there. Be present. Look like I knew what I was doing. Don't eat anything until I was sure it was safe for human consumption. Don't stare at the alien species even though every human instinct was screaming, look at that, look at that, look at that. It's harder than it sounds. I was approximately 40 minutes into the reception, having successfully not stared at 3 different fascinating things, when I became aware of someone standing about 8 feet to my left who hadn't been there before. I turned my head slowly, the way you do when you don't want to look like you're looking, and found myself at eye level with a Vethali person who was approximately my height, which was unusual because most adult Vethali I'd encountered were taller than me. The Vethali physiology is hard to describe accurately. They're bilaterally symmetrical, bipedal, with 4 arms, 2 primary, 2 secondary that fold close to the torso at rest, and a face that is recognizably a face in the most fundamental sense. Forward-facing sensory organs, a central respiratory structure, something that functions as a mouth. But the proportions are different. The skull is slightly larger and more elongated. The skin has a faint translucency at the joints that you can't really see unless you're close. But when the light hits it right, you get the impression that there's something moving underneath. The eyes are the most striking thing. Large, slightly faceted, capable of independent movement, which sounds alarming but you get used to it, or at least I did. The color shifts with emotional state, which the briefing documents had covered, and which I'd practiced not reacting to. This Vethali, Lieth Nasolith, though I didn't know her name yet, was watching the room with both eyes pointing the same direction, which I'd already learned was a Vethali signal of concentrated attention. She was wearing the formal garment of the Vethali royal house, which is a kind of layered outer robe in deep indigo with silver threading that follows patterns I later learned are unique to the bloodline. It's beautiful in the way that things made over centuries of refinement are beautiful. Every element there for a reason, nothing wasted, the whole thing carrying more meaning in its design than I could probably read in a year of study. She was standing very still, and she was doing the Vethali version of what I could only describe as trying not to look as nervous as she was. I recognized it because I'd done the same thing for my first 3 hours on the station. There's a particular quality to performed composure, a slightly excessive stillness, a careful management of where your eyes go. You can feel the effort of it. I looked away, went back to monitoring the room. About 4 minutes later, she spoke. Vethali standard sounds like water running over smooth stone if the water had syntax. The tones carry meaning as much as the consonants and vowels do. I had basic recognition, enough to understand roughly 1 word in 5 if someone spoke slowly, but nothing approaching functional. We had translation units. Small devices, worn discreetly, that processed audio and delivered text to a display in my peripheral vision. They lagged about 2 seconds behind. She said, "You are from the Reach territory." Not a question, a statement, the way you'd say it if you'd already worked it out and were confirming it out loud more for yourself than for the other person. I turned to face her. Yes, Sergeant First Class Delane O'Reilly's Human Diplomatic Corps Security Attaché. And you are, I paused, because you don't just announce that you know who a member of an alien royal family is without being acknowledged first. That's basic protocol. I'm sorry, I don't want to assume. May I ask your name? She looked at me with both eyes for a long moment. Then she said, in accented but clearly practiced human standard, You speak Vethali standard. You recognized my question. Very approximately, I said. My translator helped. Something shifted in her expression, or shifted in her eye color, rather, which is where Vethali expression lives most clearly. It went from the deep blue-violet of careful neutrality to something that had more green in it. The briefing document said green indicated interest, possibly also something close to what humans would call amusement, though the cultural equivalent was imprecise. Most humans at these events speak only their own language and use translation entirely, she said. They do not attempt the words. Most humans probably pick up the language faster than me, I said. I'm working with about 30 words and a lot of guesswork. The green deepened. I am Liath na Solith, she said, daughter of Verath na Solith, sovereign of Veth Prime. It's an honor to meet you, Liath na Solith, I said, and I meant it. She nodded. The Vethali nod is a small horizontal tilt of the head rather than vertical. I'd practiced responding appropriately without mirroring, and then she said, "This is your first summit." That obvious? You are looking at everything, she said. The experienced delegates look at each other. The ones who are new look at everything else first. I thought about that. Is it your first summit too? A pause, slightly too long to be casual. Yes, she said. And there it was. The confirmation of the nervous composure, the too-still posture, the eyes that had been scanning the room with that particular quality of someone who's trying to map an unfamiliar space without looking like they're doing it. Then we're in the same situation, I said. She looked at me again with both eyes aligned. We are not in the same situation, she said, but her tone wasn't unkind. It was precise. I am a member of the Vethali royal house attending a ceremony for the first time. You are a security specialist from a species that has been part of the Galactic Council for 41 years. These are different kinds of new. I had to respect that. She was right. Fair point, I said, but you're still looking at the room the same way I am. The green in her eyes shifted again. More complex this time, a color I didn't have a reference for in the briefing documents, something between green and silver. Perhaps, she said. That was the first conversation. It lasted maybe 4 minutes in total. Then Ambassador Vasquez needed me and I had to excuse myself, and by the time I looked back, Liath na Solith had moved to stand near her mother across the room. But I caught her eye, both eyes, pointing the same direction just once before I turned away. And something about that small exchange stayed with me for the rest of the evening, in a way I couldn't quite name. Build tension, the days that followed. The next 3 days of pre-summit events had a shape to them that I started to recognize by the end of day 2. Formal structure in the mornings, looser engagement in the afternoons, shared space events in the evenings. The delegations mingled according to an elaborate choreography of political courtesy. You spent time with your allies. You made at least one positive gesture toward delegations you had tensions with. You did not under any circumstances make direct eye contact with the drain unless they initiated it first. And you avoided the third-tier corridor on the west side after local midnight, because that was when the Caravith conducted their private observation rituals, and they were very politely very clear about not wanting company. I saw Liath na Solith several times across those days. The second time was at the cultural exchange on day 2. Her mother was presenting the Vethali historical record, a compilation of light-based historical documentation that the Vethali use instead of written records, which projects images and sound, and something that human neuroscientists are still trying to understand, but which appears to carry emotional impression as well as information. It's extraordinary to experience. Most of our delegation was moved in ways they hadn't expected to be. Liath was standing to the side of the presentation space, slightly behind the main delegation. She wasn't part of the presentation, she was observing it, and she was watching the humans more than she was watching the presentation, watching us react. I noticed her noticing us, and I didn't look away fast enough, and she caught me catching her. There was a brief moment where neither of us knew what to do with that, and then she did a small, deliberate thing. She tilted her head in the Vethali acknowledgement nod. I returned it, tried to get the angle right. She tilted her head again, an adjustment, a correction, and I mirrored it. The silver-green color returned to her eyes. No words exchanged, but something passed between us anyway, a kind of mutual recognition that I find genuinely difficult to articulate. Not friendship, it was too early for that, and too much separated us for it to be that simple. But something in the vicinity of I see you and you see me, and we're both figuring this out. The third time was on day 3, during the species history presentations. Humanity's presentation was given by Ambassador Vasquez, a careful, honest, well-constructed account of human history that acknowledged our wars and our failures along with our achievements, because she and the Corps had made a deliberate decision that pretending humanity was something it wasn't was not a long-term strategy that would serve us. It was a good presentation. I'm biased, but I think it was genuinely good. Afterward, during the informal period, Liath Nusolith found me. Deliberately this time she crossed the room. The human history presentation, she said, acknowledged periods of significant internal conflict. We have a lot of those, I said. Most species do not emphasize those periods in their historical presentations at formal diplomatic events. Ambassador Vasquez thinks it's better to acknowledge them than to have someone else bring them up. Liath considered this. That is an unusual strategy, to lead with vulnerability. She doesn't see it as vulnerability, I said. She sees it as credibility. If we hide the difficult parts and someone finds them anyway, we lose trust. If we name them ourselves, we control the framing. Both eyes aligned on me. The color was something I was starting to be able to read, not with precision, but with a rough sense of the register. This was the same complex silver-green as before, with something deeper underneath it. Your ambassador is strategic, she said. She's exceptional, I said without hesitation. You trust her? It wasn't a question exactly, but it seemed to want an answer. Yes. That is also unusual, she said. Many of the security personnel at these events regard their ambassadors as obligations, responsibilities, not as people they trust. I looked at her. How do you know that? I watch, she said simply. This is my first summit, but I have been studying for it for a long time. I have read accounts of the previous 2 renewals. I have studied the behavioral patterns of interspecies diplomatic security. I have, she paused, and something in her posture shifted. I have prepared very extensively for this event. And there it was again, the nervous composure. But this time with something underneath it that I recognized as a different thing entirely. She was afraid. Not afraid of the room, not afraid of the ceremony, afraid of something specific. I didn't ask. It wasn't my place and we weren't there yet. We'd spoken 3 times for maybe 10 minutes in total. You don't ask that kind of question that quickly, not across that kind of cultural distance. But I filed it away. The 4th encounter was day 3 evening, during what the schedule called a free social period, which was the diplomatic equivalent of recess. Just everyone standing around with beverages appropriate to their biology, trying to have conversations that weren't loaded with political significance, while knowing that every conversation at an event like this carries at least some political significance. I was standing near the edge of the room with a cup of something the station's kitchen had prepared that was approximately close enough to coffee to make me nostalgic for the real thing, watching Ambassador Vasquez navigate a conversation with 3 different delegations simultaneously, when Liath appeared beside me. She had a tendency to appear. Not sneaking, the Vethali aren't a stealthy species by nature, and her secondary arms made a soft sound against her robes when she moved. But she had the capacity for still, deliberate arrival that meant you often didn't notice her until she was already standing there. "May I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." "The ceremony on the 5th day," she paused, "you will be in attendance." "As part of Ambassador Vasquez's security detail, yes." "What is your position during the ceremony?" I told her. 3rd tier, left side, visual line to the ambassador's position on the signing floor. Standard ceremonial post. She was quiet for a moment, both eyes ahead, looking at the room, not at me. "The 3rd tier," she said, "left side. That is adjacent to the Vethali royal family's observer position." I thought about the floor plan I'd memorized. She was right. The Queen's observer platform was on the right side of the 3rd tier. My post was on the left. We'd be maybe 30 feet apart. "I hadn't thought about it that way," I said. Another silence, longer this time. "Sergeant Reyes," she said, "what do you know about the Vethali coming-of-age ceremony?" I thought carefully about this. Very little. It's referenced in the briefing documents but not described in detail. The documents indicate it's a private matter. "It is," she said, "typically," but she stopped, started again. "The Meridian Accords renewal has, in 3 previous instances, been used as an occasion for Vethali heirs to undergo their public ceremonial acknowledgement. The formal recognition of adult status. It is a significant ceremony. It involves—" She stopped again. This was not the careful, composed manner of someone presenting information. This was the halting speech of someone who had reached the edge of what they'd prepared for, and was now in territory they hadn't fully mapped. "You're going to undergo it," I said, "at this summit." She didn't answer immediately. Both eyes stayed forward. "My mother believes it is appropriate timing," she said finally. "The witnesses are significant. The occasion is the renewal of the Accords carries a particular—" Another pause. "There is a component of the ceremony, a requirement. It is traditional, very old." "What is it?" She turned then and looked at me directly, both eyes fully aligned, and I saw something in the color of them that I hadn't seen before. A deep, almost red undertone beneath the blue-violet of formal register. "The heir must be held," she said, "by a witness, during the central portion of the ceremony. The holding it is physical contact, continuous contact. It represents, in our tradition, it represents the anchor, the presence of another person who confirms the reality of the transition, who grounds the heir while the formal recognition occurs." I was quiet, working through this. "Who holds you?" "Traditionally," she said, "it is a member of a junior allied family. A peer of similar age, someone who is acknowledged, known. The selection has political significance. It is a statement about relationships and alliances." "But," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. "I do not know anyone here," she said. "I have never attended a summit before. I have read about everyone here. I have studied them. But I have met no one who—" She stopped. "The ceremony requires genuine presence. It cannot be performed with someone who is only formally appropriate. The Vethali can. We are sensitive to performed versus genuine contact. If the person holding my hand does not truly—" She paused on the word as if she was choosing it carefully. "Does not truly see me, it disrupts the ceremony. The elder witnesses can feel the difference." I let the silence sit for a moment. "You're telling me this because you've spent 4 days watching people," I said, "and you've made some kind of assessment." She looked at me steadily. "You are the first person at this summit," she said, "who asked for my name before offering their own rank." I opened my mouth. "You were going to give your title," she said. "I saw you stop yourself. You asked instead. That was unusual." I didn't know what to say to that. "I'm a security attaché," I finally said. "I'm not a dignitary. I'm not an appropriate political statement. I'm not even a diplomat." "No," she said. "You are not." And the way she said it, the inflection, the particular quality of it, made it sound not like a limitation but like a deliberate point. "My mother," she said, "does not know I am having this conversation." I absorbed that. "Then we should probably think carefully about what happens next," I said. "Yes," she said, "we probably should." The night before. Day 4 was the species banquet, and it passed in a blur of careful navigation and Corporal Mbeki's rice, and a moment where the Queen, Vereth na Solith herself, held eye contact with Ambassador Vasquez for a beat longer than protocol required, and something passed between them that I couldn't read, but that made the senior diplomatic staff quietly vibrate with significance. I didn't sleep much that night. Partly the collar, mostly the conversation. I'd reported it to Ambassador Vasquez. That was not optional. I was her security attaché, and a member of the host species' royal family having an unofficial conversation with me about a ceremonial requirement was not something I could sit on. I told her what Lyeth had said, all of it. Vasquez listened without interrupting, which was one of her particular skills. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "She asked you directly." "No," I said. "She explained the situation. She didn't ask. She left it open." "But you understood what she was asking?" "Yes." Another long silence. Vasquez had her left thumbnail pressed into her index finger. "Delano," she said. She used my first name when the formal register would be dishonest, which I'd learned to take as a signal. "You understand what this would mean?" "I've been thinking about it since yesterday." "If you do this, if a human is the one holding the Vethali heir during her coming-of-age ceremony, at a summit attended by every major species in this region of the galaxy." "It's a statement," I said. "It's more than a statement," she said. "It's the kind of thing that gets written into diplomatic histories, the kind of thing that changes how species see each other. The Vethali royal family choosing a human as the ceremonial witness and anchor for their heir's public recognition." "If she chooses me," I said. "She hasn't asked, I haven't agreed." "And the Queen doesn't know about the conversation." Vasquez looked at me. "The Queen doesn't know about the conversation," she repeated very carefully. "That's what she told me." "Then either she's more independent than anyone has given her credit for," Vasquez said, "or her mother knows exactly what's happening and has decided not to officially know." I thought about Vereth na Solith, moving through the convergence hall with 200 years of experience, and the specific certainty of someone who has never been in a situation they weren't prepared for. "Yeah," I said, "that's what I thought too." Vasquez exhaled slowly. "Here's what I can tell you. Officially, I cannot authorize this. It's too far outside your role and mine. If this happens, it has to happen as a personal decision, between you and the young woman." "I understand." "What I can tell you unofficially," she said, "is that in 22 years of diplomatic work, I have never seen a member of the Vethali royal family seek out a human for anything personal. The Vethali regard us with, at best, polite curiosity. We are very new to them. We're interesting but unproven." She looked at me steadily. "She watched everyone at this summit for 4 days, Vasquez said, and she picked you." "Because I asked her name first," I said, "which feels like a thin basis for." "It's not thin," Vasquez said. "For the Vethali, how you begin a relationship tells them almost everything they need to know about who you are. They study first contact patterns the way we study long-term behavior. You started by treating her as a person before a rank." She stood up. "Get some sleep, Delano. Whatever you decide tomorrow, I trust your judgment." Which is exactly what you say to someone when you trust their judgment. But you also know they've already made up their mind, and you want to make sure they know they have the room to act on it. Part 2, the ceremony. The morning. The 5th day arrived the way big days always do, both faster and slower than you expected. Fast in the sense that you look up and it's already 600, and the pre-ceremony briefing is in 30 minutes. Slow in the sense that every individual minute between the briefing and the ceremony felt like it was made of something thicker than normal time. I dressed carefully. The ceremonial blues fit exactly the same as they had on day one, which meant my collar still sat wrong, and I still shifted my neck, and I still couldn't fix it. The Covenant Hall had been transformed overnight. I'd been in it before for the welcome reception, for 2 of the daily events. I thought I understood its scale, but the summit technical team had done something to it between the end of day 4 and now that made it feel like a completely different space. The central floor, which had been open and navigable before, was now defined by an enormous inlaid circle of what appeared to be light embedded in the floor itself, like someone had taken fiber optics and woven them into the station's bones. The circle pulsed very slowly, in a rhythm I eventually realized matched the breathing of the station's walls. It breathed with the building. The tiered observation levels above the floor had been arranged by delegation with the careful logic of a seating chart that had probably been argued over for months. The Vethali royal family observer platform was on the right side of the 3rd tier. My post was on the left. I got there early. I'd half expected, half hoped that Lyeth would find me before things started. Give me some signal of what was coming, what was expected, what I'd actually agreed to by not saying anything after our conversation the night before. But the hall filled quickly, 40-plus delegations, hundreds of individuals, the controlled chaos of an event this significant settling into its formal arrangement, and I didn't see her until the ceremony had already begun. The ceremony begins. The opening of the Meridian Accords renewal was unlike any human ceremony I'd ever attended. There was no announcement, no signal, no MC saying please welcome. It began with the Vethali elder witnesses, 7 of them, the oldest members of the Vethali diplomatic lineage, walking into the center circle in a specific formation that I later learned had been determined by an astronomical calculation I don't have the math for. They moved in silence. The hall was already going quiet as they entered, that specific quality of quiet I mentioned at the beginning, not silence, but the absence of the noise that was there before. By the time the 7 elders reached their positions in the circle, the hall was completely still. Then the light in the floor circle shifted. It went from the slow pulse of the station's breath to something more complex, a pattern that seemed to move outward from the center in concentric rings, very slowly, like ripples in water. And with it came a sound that I can only describe as the absence of other sounds made audible, a frequency just at the edge of what human ears can process. I felt it in my sternum before I heard it. And then the Veth began. The Veth, I'm using the closest human phonetic, is the Vethali formal acknowledgement of time and continuity. It has no direct equivalent in human ceremony. The closest thing I can compare it to is a combination of an oath, a prayer, and a historical recitation, delivered simultaneously by all 7 elders in harmonic tones that create a combined sound more complex than any one voice. It lasted approximately 40 minutes. I understood maybe a tenth of it directly and got the rest through my translation unit, and even with translation, I felt like I was missing enormous amounts of nuance. But I understood the emotional register. That came through clearly. This was something that mattered enormously. This was something that had happened before and would happen again, and every time it happened it carried the weight of all the times before it. This was the galaxy's version of something humans have known forever, that some moments are load-bearing, that some rituals exist because some things are too important to say only once. 40 minutes in, the elders shifted formation, and that was when I saw Lyeth. She came in from the right side of the 3rd tier. She was dressed differently than I'd seen her before, a formal garment in the deepest indigo I'd ever seen, with silver threading that caught the light of the floor circle and reflected it in patterns that seemed to move. Her secondary arms were folded close to her torso. Her primary arms were at her sides. Both eyes were forward. She moved through the observer section and came to stand at the railing at the edge of the third tier, looking down at the ceremony floor below. And then she looked left. Across 30 feet of space, in a hall with hundreds of observers and 47 delegations, and the sound of the Veth still resonating in the air, she looked directly at me. I looked back. Neither of us moved. Below, the elder witnesses were transitioning from the opening Veth to the next phase. I didn't fully understand what was coming, but I'd read the rough structure of the ceremony, and I knew that the middle section, the central portion, was when the heir's acknowledgement would occur. If it was going to occur. The Queen had been in her observer position at the center of the right side platform, watching the ceremony floor with the stillness of someone who had seen this before and understood its weight. She had not, as far as I could tell, looked at her daughter. She was not looking now, either. But I'd thought about what Ambassador Vasquez said, and I thought about the specific quality of not looking that Vereth na Solith was performing, and I was increasingly certain it was intentional. The elder witnesses completed the transition. The floor light shifted again. And that's when Liath na Solith walked across the 30 feet of space between us. She walked deliberately, not quickly, not slowly, with the specific quality of someone who has made a decision and is now carrying it out, and the decision is final. She stopped in front of me. Both eyes aligned on my face. She said, in accented human standard, "The ceremony is about to reach the central acknowledgement phase. The anchor presence is required." "I know," I said. "You are not politically appropriate for this role," she said. "You are not from an allied family. You are not Vethali. You are not, the elder witnesses may object. My mother may," she stopped. "The implications are." "I know," I said again. She looked at me. "You have been thinking about this," she said. "All night," I said, "and I think you're wrong about one thing." Her eye color shifted. "Which thing?" "You said you don't know anyone here, but I think you know me a little bit, and I think that's actually what you meant." The silver green returned, and underneath it, something warmer, a color I didn't have a name for but recognized as something genuine. "The ceremony requires continuous physical contact," she said. "Hand contact specifically. From the beginning of the acknowledgement phase to the end, the elder witnesses will read the contact." "I understand." "If the contact is not genuine," she said, "if you are not truly present, the elders will know. It cannot be performed. It must be." "Liath," I said, using her name for the first time, and she went still. I held out my hand.